Chapter 1, Part 5, How to write the material and the message. From the introduction part, we should have studied the methodology employed in study. If necessary, you also defended the reasons for your choices of particular methods over competing methods. Now, in the materials and methods, like experimental procedures, you must give the full details. Most of this section should be written in the past tense. Also remember, this section should be written in the past tense because you already done this kind of experiment here. The pictures is usually in the medical or biological research field. We use this kind of methods. This section, they also have a clear purpose. Like here, we can describing the experimental design and then provide enough detail so that a competent worker can repeat the experiment. That means if other readers read your paper, they can repeat the experiment by your material and the methods. Also here can provide information that will let readers judge the appropriateness of your experiment methods and thus the probable validity of the findings, and also provide information that will permit assessment of the extent to which the results can be generalized. That means if practical readers can to judge whether your result is reasonable by reading your methods. If you make a mess here, then the result perhaps is unbelievable. So in this part, should be careful writing. The careful writing of this section is critically important because the cornerstone of the scientific methods require that your results must be reproducible. If your method is wrong, how can the results be reproducible? And for the results to be adjusted reproducible, you must provide the basis for the repetition of the experiments by others. Repetition of the experiment. Sometimes the others can repeat your experiment by reading your material and methods part. The experiments are unlikely to be reproduced is beside the point. The potential for reproducing the same and similar results must exist, or your paper does not represent good science. Most of the time, your data, your results have to be reproduced if use the similar or same materials and methods. When your paper is subject to a peer review, a good reviewer will read the material and methods section carefully. If there is serious doubt that your experiments could be repeated, the reviewer will recommend rejection of your manuscript, no matter how impressive your results. That means Although sometimes your result is significant and is have a very good effect on some theory or practice, but if the reviewer found your material and the message is not good enough, they will doubt your results. So let's go to the materials part. For materials, include the exact technical specifications, quantities, and source and methods of preparation. Sometimes it is even necessary to list pertinent chemical or physical properties of the reagents used. In general, avoid the use of trade names. Use the generic or chemical names is usually preferred. However, if there are no difference among proprietary products, and if this difference might be critical, then use the trade name plus the name of the manufacturers is essential. Also, experimental animals, plants, microorganisms should be identified accurately, usually by genus, species, and strain designations. Sources should be listed and special characteristics like age, sex, genetic, and physiological status described. All these kind of special characters. Let's go to the materials part. For materials, include the exact technical specifications, quantities, and source and methods of preparation. Sometimes it is even necessary to list pertinent chemical or physical properties of the reagents used. In general, avoid the use of trade names. Use the generic or chemical names is usually preferred. However, if there are no difference among proprietary products, and if this difference might be critical, then use the trade name plus the name of the manufacturers is essential. Also, experimental animals, plants, microorganisms should be identified accurately, usually by genus, species, and strain designations. Sources should be listed and special characteristics like age, sex, genetic, and physiological status described. All these kind of special characteristics should be described. If human subjects were used, sometimes we have to give the criteria for selection and an informed consent statement should be included in the manuscript. Likewise, if human or animal subjects were used, approval by the appropriate committees should be noted, such as ethics committees. Because the value of your paper or your reputation can be damaged if your results are not reproducible, you must describe research materials with great care. Examine the instructions to the author of the journal to which you plan to submit, because important specifics are open details here. Like for the cell, Sometimes the source of cell utilized species, sex, strain, race, age of donor, and whether primary or established should be clearly indicated. The name, city, and state or country of the source reagent should be stated when first cited. Specific tests used for verification of cell lines or novel reagents should be identified. Specific tests for the presence of mycoplasma contamination of cell line are recommended. If these tests were not performed, this fact should be clearly stated. Other data relating to unique biological, biochemical, or immunological markers should also be included if available. For the methods, the usual order of presentation is chronological. Obviously, however, related to methods should be described together. The related methods should be described together. So the order of presentation of methods not always chronological, and usually strict chronological order cannot always be followed. For example, even if a particular assay was not done until late in the research, the assay methods should be described along with the other assay methods, not by itself in a later part of the material and methods section. For the measurement and analysis, just be precise. Methods are similar to the cookbook recipe. If the assay mixture was heated, given the temperature, questions such as how and how much should be answered by the author and not left for the reviewer or the reader to puzzle over. Prepare this part, you always ask how and how much. Statistically, analyses are often necessary, but your paper should emphasize the data, not the statistics. Generally, a lengthy description of statistics methods indicated that the writer had recently acquired this information and believed the readers need similar enlightenment. Ordinary statistically methods generally should be used without comments. Advanced or unusual methods may require a literature citation. In some fields, statistically methods or statistically software is identified at the end of material and methods section. Sometimes have some subheadings. The materials and methods section often have subheadings. To see whether subheadings would indeed be suitable, look at analogous paper in your target journal. When possible, consult subheadings that match those to be used in the results section. The writing of both sections will be easier if you strive for the internal consistency, and the reader will be able to grasp quickly the relationship of particular methods to the related results. So, if you have to prepare the subheadings, it is better if you match those to be used in the results section. Here, we also need for the reference, use detail so that a competent worker could repeat the experiment. If your method is new, you must provide all of the needed detail. If your method has been published in a journal, the literature reference should be given. For a method with which readers might not be familiar, a few words of description tend to be worth adding, especially if the journal in which the message was described might not be easily accessible. For a message well known to the readers, only the literature reference is needed. If several alternative methods were commonly employed, it is useful to identify your methods briefly as well as to set the reference. Here is an example. It is better to state cells were broken by ultrasonic treatment as previously described. It's better than to state cells were broken as previously described, because from the previous sentence we know is broken by the ultrasonic treatment. So it will be good. And you can set a lot of reference here. Don't have to show it in detail if this kind of message already published in a journal. Also, we should put some the tables or figures here. If many microstrains or mutants were used in study, perhaps it's better prepare strain tables, identifying the source and properties of mutants, plasmids, bacteria, phage, or electron. The properties of multi-chemical compounds can also be presented in tabular form. It will benefit both the author and the reader. If the description is brief enough, it may be included in a table footnote or finger ledger if the journal allows. Fingers also can add in presenting methods. Examples include like flowcharts of experimental protocols, or diagram of the experimental apparatus. Here, for the correct form and grammar, you should have to pay attention. Do not make the common error of include some of the results in this section. Do not include the results. And exact and specific terms are being dealt with, and the precise use English is a must. Sometimes even a missing comma can cause mess, a lot of mess. Sometimes passive voice open can validly be used, although what was done must be specific. Who did it is often irrelevant. It doesn't matter who did it. Only what was done is must be specific. Always watch for spelling errors. Here, a lot of persons perhaps doesn't think is important. That's wrong. Sometimes it will show the credit of your scientist work. So always watch for spelling errors. Usually, they have this kind of steps. Like first starting setting, time span, starting design, we should present it. Then present some the subjects used in the study, and some the initial principles, and ethical principles and the research protocol followed, and the outcomes and their evaluation. And the last is the data analysis methods used, usually like this kind of steps in this part. So for the writing and for writing the material and the message section, here is the conclusion. There include the 5 parts. First, scientific writing is an art which has to be developed, and providing a clear, concise message section is part of the process. So how to clear and concise. The message section of scientific research paper is most significant, because it determines the validity of the study. Other person the result can be reducible if the other scientists follow your protocol, follow your methods and the materials. Here, also sometimes mentioning the rationale or assumptions involved in the various procedures of study is a virtual component. Sometimes you can. Reliability is a crucial component of the message section. So, by using the same protocol, the results can be replicated by another researchers. This is the important part. So, at last, remember precise, accurate presentation of the various subjects, materials, preparations in this study, in these sections.